Hello everybody and welcome back. Good to talk to all of you again today. And today we're going to be talking about the World of Warships Dockyard event. Always a fascinating spectacle, even if we never actually complete the ship. But we're not really here to just stare at a pretty ship being built, although it is very difficult to say that Hizen is pretty, but that's kind of beside the point. We're here to ideally learn something about ships. So why don't we start off at the very beginning, and as the ship is getting built, we'll talk about stuff that pop out that are interesting. First things first, of course, is the keel of the ship and the installation of the double bottom. The keel serves as the backbone of the ship, and the double bottom prevents the ship from sinking if she suffers damage to her bottom shell plating. For example, let's say if a ship runs aground. The double bottom also serves as a flat floor for equipment and such to be placed on top of it. Bulkheads are the next things to appear, and these are important pieces of primary structure. They carry some of the ship's vertical load, they resist transverse deformation of the ship, and they also provide watertight integrity. Now for a warship, it is expected that you're going to see a ton of watertight compartments, as the ship needs to stay afloat even after battle damage. Some of the key bulkheads are the forward collision bulkhead, the fore and aft engine room bulkheads, and the aft peak bulkhead. You should also note that the bulkheads actually go all the way up to the main deck, a lesson learned from the Titanic, whose watertight compartments did not do such a thing, and of course when she hit an iceberg, we know what happened to the ship. You should also notice that there's a tremendous amount of longitudinal and transverse structure that goes into a battleship. Now these look tiny in comparison to the bulkheads, but they're critical to the ship's structure. That's because ships as a whole have to deal with a ton of different stressors. One of the major stressors is hogging and sagging, and these put a tremendous amount of load on the ship's structure. Get a sense of what kind of motion we're looking at, found this clip of a container ship in heavy seas. As the battleships tend to be rather long, they experience the same kind of movement. So of course, this is not a good thing. And not only are these the only stressors, there's actually a ton of other ones as well. So for example, the bow area will encounter pounding and slamming. The outer shell plating will experience panting. And if the ship was to encounter, let's say, a wave hitting it from the side, it would encounter racking. So it's the job of the naval architects to come up with a structure for a ship that will allow it to do everything that it needs to do to resist the stresses that it's going to come under, etc., etc., etc. And two of the commonly used framing systems are the longitudinal framing system and the transverse framing systems. Now, as a side note, there is a combination system as well, but it's made up of parts of transverse and parts of the longitudinal system. So I don't exactly think of it as a completely separate system. Now, before I get into the structural thing, I should point out that in both longitudinal and transverse framing systems, you will actually have elements of the other system. So a transverse system will have longitudinal girders and side stringers. A longitudinal system will also have transverse web frames. Now, in most cases for longer ships, the longitudinal system is preferred due to the increased amount of bending stresses that long ships experience, and the longitudinal system is superior in those kinds of situations. However, if you look at Hizen, you might notice that she seems to have mostly transverse framing as the main thing, and not as much longitudinal. And this might seem odd at first, but you have to remember something. Battleships have very heavy armor plates, especially on the side. And the longitudinal system, while it's great for dealing with bending stresses, is not great at supporting a massive amount of weight directly tacked onto it. And so for this particular reason, you'll see a lot of battleships having transverse frames, especially when it comes to areas like the main armor belt. Now, keep in mind that regardless of which framing system the naval architects end up choosing, all these ships that are built are designed to deal with the bending stresses that they're going to encounter, and the ships are going to bend to a reasonable degree. Unless, of course, your ship happens to be made of glorious Soviet steel, in which case...
The ship's structure has several inserts made of soft iron that allow her to bend on waves. Because the ship is long, 156 meters, if I remember correctly, her hull can bend up to 30 meters on waves. If it were solid steel, it would be ripped apart and the ship could break in two. And I heard of it happening to other, not our, ships.
Now we know where the naval legend bit comes from. If a ship can truly bend 30 meters, it would indeed be a naval legend, unsurpassed by any other ship in the world. The glory of Soviet shipbuilding strikes again. Moving on, you should also see the installation of the ship's boilers and machinery into their own respective watertight compartments. This is obviously necessary as you don't want a single hit from a shell or torpedo taking out your entire propulsion system, as that would be really bad. One very important aspect of ships that you don't see too much of during the dockyard build process is the insane number of pipes and wires that be running throughout the ship. And this is, of course, very, very important, especially things like pipes, because they're necessary for moving around all sorts of fluids like oil and water, which are essential for the ship's propulsion and firefighting systems. Without those things, the ship just basically won't function. You see a bit of it right there. There's a couple of pipes leading around, but in reality, there is going to be a ton more. If you want to think about it in terms of a human sense, the bones of a human being are like the structure that you're seeing on the ship, while the pipes would basically be the blood vessels within us, without which we wouldn't really function either. Now, these types of details obviously would be way too much for the modelers and animators of wargaming, so they sort of kind of represent a little bit of it for you right in the middle of the ship there. One final interesting aspect of shipbuilding is how much it has actually changed over the years. So if you were to look at shipbuilding today, for example, you won't really see ships being built in the same way that you see it in the dockyard process. Ships today are constructed in modules and they're assembled module by module, almost like a giant Lego set, where the dockyard process that you see with Hizen is the much more sort of traditional standard process of that period of time. The interesting thing to note is that the US actually did use modular construction techniques with the Liberty ships, but as soon as World War II was over, they basically went back to the traditional method of construction. To illustrate the difference, take a look at how a modern aircraft carrier is being built, and you'll see that, yeah, at the beginning there looks like there's some things that might be similar to the way the Hizen was built, but very, very quickly you'll see the difference. The new builds are coming together with big modules being moved into place, where this is not the case for ships back in the day, where it was built from the keel up, little bit by little bit, layer by layer, level by level. Today, and this can be all kinds of ships, even if you look at like a way a cruise ship is constructed, it is all prefabricated big modules that get lowered into place, welded together, and very quickly you're able to assemble really large ships. Remember Hizen's bow? It was being built layer by layer. Take a look at that. The modern one, the whole bow just comes together as one module and it's just welded to the ship. Quite a big contrast if you really want to visually think about it. Finally, of course, we are getting to the end of today's video. Hizen, of course, as you can see, is getting her final deck plates fitted, and this basically closes up the ship's hull per se, and that really is it. After this, it's mostly fitting it out and then building up the superstructure on top, but the fundamental core aspects of the ship in terms of the hull is now complete, and that pretty much brings us to the end of the video today. Anyways, I hope you all found the video interesting, and I hope you all learned a little bit more about the way ships are designed and constructed. And the next time that we have another dockyard event, you'll be able to look at it a little bit more nuance, a little bit more detail, and find the joy in things that are not just purely the gameplay in World of Warships itself. Until next time, take care, be safe, and I'll talk to all of you again soon.